They told you his mind was diseased, but no man of medicine had language for what they saw when they looked into the eyes of Ezekiel Drummond in the winter of 1824. In the prison infirmary of Charleston, South Carolina, the ward smelled of salt air and rotting linens, and the guards swore the temperature dropped each time they passed his cell. He had been chained at the wrists, yet his posture was regal, his gaze patient, like someone who had read the final page of a book you had only just begun. Ezekiel spoke rarely, but when he did, the words came in a tone that felt ancient, older than the prison, older than the city itself. No one could trace his origins. Though some whispered he had drifted ashore after a storm, walking barefoot from the beach into the marketplace, without a scratch on him, and without leaving tracks in the sand. The merchants remembered his smile, a faint curve that seemed to weigh down the air around it. They said he could look at a man and tell him the year, the month, the day, and the hour he would die. At first they laughed. Then the first prediction came true. Then the second. By the third, the laughter had stopped. Doctors were summoned to examine him. Some insisted he was a fraud, while others refused to stay in the same room after hearing him speak. Ezekiel told them that the body was only a mask, and the mind only a door, and that behind that door was something neither church nor state wanted opened. It was not madness they saw in him, but a deliberate stillness, as if his thoughts were fixed on something beyond this world. He ate almost nothing. Yet his body never weakened. He never slept, yet he never seemed tired. Those who guarded him began to dream of him, standing at the foot of their beds, whispering to them words they could not recall on waking yet, left them shaking until sunrise. The warden ordered his chains doubled, but the fear did not lessen. In a place meant to strip men of their will, Ezekiel Drummond seemed untouchable. And in that stillness, a question began to grow among those who watched him. Was he man, or something wearing the memory of one? The first night after the doubled chains, the prison fell silent earlier than usual, as though every breath within its walls was being measured by something unseen. The guards posted at Ezekiel's cell spoke in low voices, afraid that even their whispers might be heard by him through the stone walls. At midnight, one guard claimed he saw Ezekiel sitting perfectly upright, his eyes open and fixed, not on the door, but on the empty air beside his bed, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. By morning, the guard's hair had gone noticeably gray, and he refused to enter that corridor again. The physicians returned at the warden's demand, determined to declare a rational cause for the unease. But each examination ended with fewer words and more glances exchanged behind closed doors. One surgeon left abruptly without collecting his payment. Another insisted on burning his notes. Theories began to swirl among the men forced to remain in his presence. Some believed Ezekiel had been born without a conscience, a true predator whose charm concealed a hunger beyond flesh. Others swore he was not born at all, but constructed by forces that had watched humanity for centuries, shaping him as a vessel to carry something across time. The town outside had its own opinions. Old women who lived by the docks crossed themselves at the mention of his name. A fisherman told of seeing Ezekiel on the shore before his arrest, staring out to sea, his lips moving without sound, his shadow stretching impossibly long against the waves. The church wanted him baptized, but the ministers could not agree on which rites would be sufficient for a man they suspected was beyond salvation. Ezekiel listened to every proposal with the same faint smile. When asked about his faith, he replied that faith was a language the living had invented to speak to the dead. From that day forward, the ministers stopped visiting. The warden doubled the go. Bards yet still the dreams spread. Men dreamt of corridors filled with water of their lungs, drawing in the ocean as easily as air of Ezekiel, standing at the far end, reaching out his hand. No matter how far they ran, in the dream, they always woke as his fingers touched their skin. The question no one dared ask aloud was growing heavier. If Ezekiel Drummond could move through their dreams, what else could he reach? By the third week, the prison was no longer a place of order, but a slow-moving sickness spreading from cell to cell, carried not by touch, but by the silent weight of Ezekiel's presence. Men who had never spoken of fears began to confess strange visions to each other in whispers over their tin plates. One claimed he saw Ezekiel walking down the corridor in the middle of the night, though every lock had been checked twice, and every guard swore no keys were missing. Another said he heard a voice behind his ear as he slept, telling him the name of a man he had killed years before, and the exact moment that man's body had stopped breathing. No one asked Ezekiel how he knew. When the prison chaplain was finally persuaded to confront him, he returned pale and silent, refusing to give sermon for 3 days. On the 4th day, he resigned and left the city entirely. The physicians, meanwhile, began to notice something no man could explain without questioning the nature of reality itself. Ezekiel's pulse never changed. It was steady as a clock, yet no stronger after food, nor weaker after fasting. His pupils did not contract in sunlight, nor widen in the dark. When they touched his skin, it was neither warm nor cold, but a temperature that seemed to refuse belonging to either world. One doctor tried to provoke him by accusing him of being a liar. Ezekiel leaned forward and whispered a phrase the doctor later repeated to no one but his own reflection, before locking his study door and not emerging for 2 days. By the time he returned, he looked as though something inside him had aged decades. Stories outside the prison began to take shape in the streets. Merchants remembered coins that seemed to darken after passing through Ezekiel's hands. Children claimed he had been seen standing at street corners long after his arrest. A sailor swore he saw him aboard a departing ship staring from the deck as the vessel Vani shed into fog. Though the man was chained miles away at that very hour, each story made the warden's voice sharper when issuing orders, yet his eyes betrayed a truth the guards had already accepted. The locks were useless. The chains were nothing but theater for the living. Ezekiel Drummond was a prisoner only because he allowed himself to be. The warden began sleeping in his office with a pistol on the desk, though he never admitted to anyone what he feared the most. It was not escape that haunted him, but the growing suspicion that Ezekiel's influence would not end at the prison walls, even if the man himself rotted in the ground. That suspicion became harder to ignore when the guards started speaking in fragments, repeating the same words over and over, without realizing it. Phrases that matched the strange cadence Ezekiel used when he spoke alone in his cell. One phrase in particular began circulating in the barracks. It had no clear meaning, but the men repeated it as though compelled. When the warden banned the words entirely, they still appeared scratched into wooden tables, into the walls of the latrine, even carved shallowly into a guard's own forearm while he slept. The local magistrate demanded to know why discipline had collapsed. The warden told him the men were simply fatigued from long hours. He did not tell him about the dreams, that every night more of his staff woke drenched in sweat, with the memory of a cold shore beneath their feet and the sound of something massive moving under black water. When the warden finally asked Ezekiel what it meant, the prisoner smiled and answered that the shore was the place where names go, when they are no longer spoken by the living. It was not an explanation. It was an invitation. The next morning, one of the guards deserted, leaving his post unlocked and the outer door unlatched. Yet no one heard footsteps on the stone, and no one saw movement in the corridor. Ezekiel was still in his cell, sitting perfectly still, hands folded, eyes open. The chains around his ankles seemed slightly different, as if they had been taken off and put back on by someone who had never seen a chain before. By then, even the most rational among them stopped asking how such things were possible. The question had changed. It was no longer whether Ezekiel could leave. It was what he would bring with him when he finally decided to go. The following days descended into something like madness. Small fires broke out mysteriously in the kitchen, and the prisoners whispered about shadows moving just beyond sight. The guards became increasingly paranoid and began watching each other with suspicion, as if fearing betrayal at every turn. One night, the warden found a note slipped under his door, written in trembling handwriting that said, "They are not what they seem." No signature, no explanation. The phrase echoed the cryptic warnings Ezekiel had muttered to himself. At dawn, a scream shattered the uneasy calm. A young prisoner was found in his cell, clawing at the walls, his eyes wide and unfocused. He babbled about voices telling him to walk into the river where the water would take him home. The doctor declared him insane, but his terror was contagious. Soon others claimed to hear whispers beneath the floorboards and see shapes twisting in the flickering torchlight. Ezekiel's cell remained untouched by the unrest. He sat silently observing as if detached from the growing chaos. The warden confronted him, demanding answers. But the prisoner's smile was thin and knowing. "I am the echo of forgotten fears, the shadow that grows when you look away. You cannot hold back the tide of what lies beneath." The warden realized then that this was no ordinary prisoner. Ezekiel was something else, something that fed on fear and uncertainty, and the town itself was becoming the trap, a place where sanity unraveled, piece by piece, until only silence remained. Days turned into nights, stretched into a nightmare without end. The town's people began vanishing one by one, with no trace left behind. Families whispered of a creeping dread that swallowed the sun itself. The well in the village square ran dry, as if poisoned by unseen hands. Whispers told of figures cloaked in shadow stalking the forest edges. No one dared venture far, for fear the trees would trap them in a labyrinth of despair. Ezekiel moved through the streets like a ghost, neither feared nor loved. His eyes held secrets too terrible for words. One evening he spoke quietly to the innkeeper's daughter, saying, "Truth is a blade that cuts deeper when wielded in darkness. The past is not dead. It claws through the soil, seeking to drag us all under." The girl shivered, though the night was warm. Her father soon disappeared, and she locked herself inside trembling. The air grew thick with silence, and the town's heartbeat slowed. Ezekiel's presence was like a shadow cast by a dying star. Every whispered rumor and every fearful glance seemed drawn to him, as if the fate of the town was entwined with his own haunted soul. The boundaries between nightmare and reality blurred, and the truth waiting to be uncovered promised nothing but oblivion. The forest surrounding Hadley became a silent witness to vanished souls. Trees whispered secrets in the wind, but no answers came. Search parties returned empty-handed, their faces etched with fear. Every trail led to dead ends or shadows that seemed to move on their own. The soil bore marks of hurried footsteps, but no footprints followed. Locals spoke of strange lights flickering in the distance late at night, strange symbols carved into bark, twisted and unreadable. Ezekiel's journals hinted at rituals older than the town itself. He wrote of a darkness beneath the earth waiting to be awakened. The vanished families were never found, only the echo of their terror remained. Some claimed to hear distant cries carried by the wind. Others swore the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The line between man and myth blurred as madness seeped in. Ezekiel knew the true horror was not what was lost, but what was created. A void where hope once lived, now filled with relentless despair. The townspeople locked their doors, but could not lock out the creeping void. Inside Hadley Academy, the walls seemed to breathe shadows. Classrooms once filled with laughter now held silence, thick as fog. Empty desks stood like graves where futures had been buried. The scent of chalk and old books mingled with something colder. Students whispered rumors of secret chambers beneath the school, places where Drummond held his darkest experiments, away from prying eyes. Marcus had told Dr. Hedrick of hidden notebooks filled with coded notes, tales of psychological warfare tactics that read like a manual for destruction. Teachers and staff vanished alongside students, leaving only broken echoes behind. No one dared return after nightfall, fearing the academy's cursed presence. The community's trust shattered like fragile glass under pressure. Hadley itself became a ghost town, haunted by memories of manipulation and loss, each empty street a testament to a mind twisted beyond redemption. The academy's doors locked tight, but the scars it left were wide open. No lesson learned could ever undo the damage wrought by Drummond's hand. Drummond's psychological atlas was more than a book. It was a weapon. Pages filled with intricate diagrams mapping the human mind's most fragile points. Instructions on exploiting guilt, fear, and shame, to bend wills without physical force. Case studies detailing families broken down methodically, like clockwork. The atlas revealed how silence can scream louder than threats, how isolation can crack even the strongest souls. Marcus described learning to identify subtle facial twitches, signaling hidden pain, to plant ideas so gently they took root without resistance. Drummond's students became silent hunters in their own communities, gathering secrets not for protection, but for dismantling lives, piece by piece. This knowledge was unprecedented, terrifying in its precision and cold logic. No law could touch a crime committed entirely in shadows of the mind. The atlas was the key to unlocking a new form of terror, psychological annihilation, a science weaponizing vulnerability with the patience of a serpent waiting to strike. The families in Hadley were not random targets, but carefully chosen puzzles, each selected to test a unique blend of fears and weaknesses. The Chamberlains, proud and haunted by old secrets. The Prescotts, bound by fragile pride and desperate hopes. The Cornelius family, crushed beneath the weight of inherited shame. Drummond's experiments were as deliberate as they were cruel. He watched them unravel as if they were threads in a grand tapestry. His students, including Marcus, played roles as both observers and executioners, learning to manipulate conversations, planting doubts that grew like poison ivy. Confronted by the scale of destruction, Dr. Hedrick felt his world crumble. His son's cold reports cataloged every private struggle and hidden fault. Sarah, his young daughter, reduced to vulnerabilities ripe for exploitation. Family love replaced by cold analysis under Drummond's relentless gaze. The town was a living laboratory for psychological warfare unseen by the outside world. The quiet despair, hiding beneath everyday smiles, was Drummond's greatest achievement. A silent war waged in the shadows of minds unaware. They had become battlegrounds. Dr. Hedrick's confrontation with Drummond was inevitable and tense. Carrying evidence and a loaded pistol, he stepped into the professor's domain. Books and instruments lined the walls, masking the darkness beneath. Drummond greeted him with calm, expecting the challenge. No remorse escaped his lips, only chilling scientific pride. He saw himself not as a villain, but a pioneer exploring human nature's depths. Murder, he argued, required corpses. He created erasure without a trace, families shattered without violence, replaced by hollow shells of former selves. His network stretched beyond Hadley, a clandestine league of mind manipulators. Encrypted letters detailed their experiments, each more disturbing than the last. The boundaries of psychology were theirs to bend and break. Drummond claimed society lacked the courage to study real consciousness. Traditional science focused on dead languages while he wielded human minds. Legal systems were powerless against crimes that left no physical evidence. Dr. Hedrick realized no court could hold this man accountable. The battle was no longer in the courtroom, but within the fragile human psyche. Drummond's departure was both a retreat and a victory. Hadley's silent massacre was complete, its secrets buried in the wilderness. The academy closed, students vanished, and the experiment ended. Yet the shadow of Drummond's methods would linger long after he was gone. After Drummond's departure, Hadley fell into eerie silence. The families vanished without a trace. Swallowed by wilderness and fear, search parties combed the forests, but found nothing but whispers and cold wind. Dr. Hedrick's heart weighed heavy with dread and unanswered questions. He suspected death, but wondered if some had escaped the engineered shame. New identities, new lives far from Hadley's haunted soil. His work shifted to understanding the terrifying techniques that destroyed them. In private, he studied Drummond's journals and notes with relentless determination, piecing together the psychological atlas that mapped human fragility. His papers would become some of the earliest records of manipulation in America. Yet no one in his time could grasp the full horror hidden in those pages. The methods were decades ahead, a dark prophecy of psychological warfare to come. Dr. Hedrick wrestled with guilt and fear, haunted by the knowledge and loss. He knew the story was far from over. It was a warning etched in human minds, how easily trust and identity could crumble under unseen pressure, and how terrifyingly precise the science of breaking a soul could be. Years passed, and Hadley became a ghost town where silence weighed heavy. Locals spoke in hushed tones of the vanished families and the strange winter of 1824. The chilling legacy of Professor Drummond's experiments lingered like a shadow. No one dared to speak openly, but fear had woven itself into the town's fabric. Dr. Hedrick's descendants carried the burden of secrets too dark to reveal. His private papers, locked away for generations, whispered the truth of psychological terror. The concept of manipulating minds like puppets was unthinkable in their era. Yet the seeds had been planted, growing slowly beneath society's surface. Across New England, similar stories whispered through academic circles and hidden correspondence, a network of scholars and manipulators spreading their silent doctrine. Their experiments became more sophisticated, their reach ever wider. Technology and science would one day give their dark art new tools to refine, but the core truth remained eternal and horrifying. Human nature could be weaponized with nothing but words and carefully timed pressure. Drummond's atlas was not merely a manual, but a map to unraveling the human spirit. The question remained: how many more had fallen victim before society even knew? The night Dr. Hedrick confronted Professor Drummond was heavy with unspoken threats. Hedrick entered the professor's study carrying the weight of his family's destruction. His heart pounded as he revealed the intelligence reports his son had compiled. Every detail of manipulation, every shattered life, was laid bare between them. Drummond's calm smile never faltered, his pale eyes gleaming with unsettling confidence. He admitted openly that his work was scientific, devoid of empathy or remorse. To him, the families were not victims, but subjects freed from their own lies. He spoke of breaking down identities without violence, without leaving evidence, a revolution of the mind, where old convictions dissolved under invisible pressure. Drummond's network stretched beyond Hadley, spreading like a silent plague, each member refining psychological warfare with surgical precision. His chilling proclamation echoed: Human conviction is infinitely malleable. Any mind can be reshaped if one masters the art of psychological pressure. Dr. Hedrick realized law and society were powerless against such a ghostly enemy. He offered Drummond an ultimatum: leave or face deadly consequences. Drummond accepted, satisfied that his research was complete. As he departed, a dark future loomed, where such invisible wars would only grow fiercer. The departure of Professor Drummond left Hadley in stunned silence. The once vibrant academy closed its doors, the whispers of vanished families echoing through empty halls. 17 families disappeared without trace, swallowed by wilderness, or worse. Search parties combed the forest, but the earth kept its secrets tightly sealed. Dr. Hedrick, burdened with grief and rage, dedicated his life to unraveling the dark science he had witnessed. His private papers, later gifted to Harvard, became some of the earliest records of psychological manipulation in America. Though decades ahead of its time, his work laid the groundwork for what would become modern psychology. Hadley's tragedy revealed a terrifying truth. Human nature could be exploited with devastating ease. A single mind, armed with knowledge and cruelty, could dismantle entire communities without firing a shot. The shadows of Drummond's experiments stretched far beyond the frozen town, hinting at a darker future, one where the battlefield was no longer land or sea, but the fragile human mind itself. Hadley had been a testing ground, a cruel proving ground for psychological warfare, unseen and unacknowledged. The families lost were not mere casualties of chance, but victims of a calculated, merciless strategy. Their silence was the final weapon wielded against them. Disappearance without a trace, identity erased forever. Dr. Hedrick's relentless pursuit of understanding became a quiet rebellion against Drummond's cold legacy. He meticulously studied every report, every detail his son Marcus had documented, piecing together the intricate web of psychological assaults inflicted on families and friends. His heart broke as he realized the extent of the manipulation. Betrayal, disguised as research, each vulnerability exploited, each secret weaponized to erode identity and hope. Drummond's so-called psychological atlas was a blueprint for human destruction. The atlas mapped the hidden fractures in minds, the invisible cracks that could shatter souls. Hedrick feared the atlas would spread, passing into darker hands eager to wield power without conscience. Yet despite the horror, he saw a grim truth. Knowledge itself was neither good nor evil. It was the wielder's intent that twisted it into a weapon or a shield. In his remaining years, Hedrick dedicated himself to warning others. Documenting the dangers of unseen manipulation, he hoped future generations would build safeguards against such silent, surgical attacks on the mind. His legacy was a solemn reminder that beneath the surface of civility, the human psyche remained fragile and vulnerable. Hadley's story was a warning, carved in shadows, a testament to the price of unexamined shame and the peril of unchecked influence. The silence that followed Professor Drummond's departure from Hadley was eerie and heavy. The academy closed its doors, its halls empty echoes of whispered secrets and broken families. Parents withdrew their children, fearing the invisible scars left by Drummond's experiments. The 17 vanished families became ghosts in the town's memory, whispered about in fearful tones. Search parties scoured the dense wilderness, hoping to find some trace, a clue, a sign. But the forest kept its secrets well, swallowing all hope with cold indifference. Rumors swirled of new identities, of distant lands where shame could not reach. Some believed survivors walked among strangers, haunted by the past they could never escape. The community fractured, its trust shattered by shadows no one fully understood. Dr. Hedrick lived with the weight of unanswered questions, torn between hope and despair. His research into psychological manipulation grew into a crusade against unseen predators. He shared his findings cautiously, knowing that the knowledge was a double-edged sword. Hadley's tragedy became a dark chapter in the unfolding story of human vulnerability, a chilling reminder that the mind, once fractured, may never truly heal. The legacy of Professor Ezekiel Drummond lingered long after he vanished into the unknown. His atlas of human psychological vulnerability became a forbidden manuscript, whispered about in secret circles. Decades would pass before science caught up to the horrifying truths he had uncovered and weaponized. Modern psychology would recognize what Drummond had pioneered: the art of manipulation without violence. His network of collaborators expanded, spreading methods that preyed on shame, isolation, and doubt. The families of Hadley became case studies in the most terrifying form of psychological warfare ever conceived. Dr. Hedrick's papers, preserved by Harvard Medical School, stood as early warnings of what lurked beneath the surface of human nature. The quiet town of Hadley held a darkness few dared to confront, a darkness born not of monsters or war, but of words and minds twisted with cruel precision. Professor Drummond proved that identity could be dismantled like a house of cards, with nothing more than carefully placed pressure points. His work remains a chilling testament to the power of the mind, and a haunting question for all of us. How vulnerable are we to the unseen forces shaping our thoughts and actions? This story is a warning and a challenge to look deeper into the shadows of history and human nature. For in those shadows lies a power as ancient as humanity itself, the power to break us or to free us, depending on who holds the key.